Kyle McNulty, and you're listening to Secure Ventures, the show that follows cutting-edge founders in the cybersecurity space to understand their plights, glories, and revolutionary products. With me in this episode is Vivek Ramachandran. Vivek is the CEO and co-founder of SquareX, which is building a Chrome extension to help users secure their web browser activities. Before SquareX, Vivek founded and led Pentester Academy, one of the leaders in online cybersecurity training. Pentester Academy was acquired by INE, which then led to the birth of SquareX. In the episode, we discuss his story of learning penetration testing skills and building educational resources, along with the pros and cons of offering an extension-based product compared to a complete browser as seen by others in the space. This episode is brought to you by VulnCheck. VulnCheck helps teams defend against weaponized exploits by delivering the most comprehensive vulnerability and exploit intelligence in the market today. VulnCheck gives enterprise and federal teams better, faster data so they can autonomously prevent exploits and reduce risk and outpace adversaries. So what's different about VulnCheck? The company delivers its solutions to teams in machine-readable and consumable formats for a truly autonomous approach to vulnerability prioritization and exploit mitigation. VulnCheck has close to 300 million unique data points, which is 5 times the exploits of ExploitDB, and 200 plus CVEs packaged into complete detection artifacts for proactive teams. VulnCheck provides a full suite of solutions to enable teams with rapid adoption of VulnCheck data, including its community tier of offerings and its enterprise-class solutions, exploit and vulnerability intelligence, and initial access intelligence. With VulnCheck, teams can proactively defend against remote execution events, enrich every data source, and continuously outpace adversaries. If you're interested in learning more about VulnCheck and checking out the free community edition where you can play with their database of known exploited vulnerabilities, please click the link in the show description so they know you came from the podcast. Vivek, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
Take me back to a little bit earlier in your career. You graduated from IIT in 2004, and as your LinkedIn puts it, you just bounced around a series of different kind of consulting, developer, architect roles for the first 7 years there. I know you had Cisco listed, so just getting a kind of broad exposure to the tech and security world. Tell me what was maybe an important lesson you learned from that time period beyond just wanting to go and do something yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I think that's a great question. So, when I graduated in 2004, the world back then of cybersecurity was very different. I was born and brought up in India. I was there in India at that time. And there wasn't any security research, anything much happening. There was a lot of outsourced work, which was probably coming in, from the US companies like Cisco into India. So the first few years, what ended up happening is I joined many of these companies, did a bunch of work. So at Cisco, I was doing, layer 2 security and programming. And along that time, I started to realize that, security products weren't being built right. So let me give you an example. At Cisco, we were working with something called Cisco NAC back in the day, network, security controls and a bunch of other things. And when I saw the architecture document, I went and told my manager, I think this could be bypassed. And he was like, you know what? People way smarter than us are kind of sitting and building this. This wouldn't be the case. And lo and behold, just 4 months later, I suddenly heard of this conference called Black Hat, where somebody was actually going ahead and breaking Cisco NAC apart. So that was my introduction to Black Hat and DEF CON and all of these conferences. And I immediately realized that, there's a broader security community apart from the folks just building defenses. So Kyle, that actually piqued my interest. And I said, I want to go on the attacker side. I want to actually go and see what it feels like to break technology. So I got a lucky break. There was this company called Airtight Networks, which was a Bay Area startup. And they were working on building wireless intrusion detection systems, but they were recruiting for their R&D team someone who could dedicatedly research, into Wi-Fi attacks. And this was way back in 2007, when, again, there was barely anything happening. So went in, I found a bunch of first-in-the-world attacks like Cafe Latte, broke an encryption scheme called web cloaking, and that is how I got into, speaking at DEF CON, speaking at Black Hat, got me completely hooked. And when I came back, I said, I just want to do this full time, go in, research, break stuff, talk about it. And that was really the pivotal moment when I completely moved into the offensive side of security and started my first company.
A lot to dig into there. First of all, I'm curious, you've had a long career at this point of the kind of offensive side, but for good, right? Penetration testing. What exploit are you most proud of?
So the one I'm most proud of is actually the cafe latte attack. So this was roughly the time when, web was still around. Wired equivalent privacy is what we used to call it. Like this was pre-WPA. And the iPhone had actually just come out. The very first iPhone. And what I had actually shown is just with a Wi-Fi device, which is like an iPhone, even if you were far away from your office network, you could still go ahead and, fall victim to an attacker who could end up breaking the Wi-Fi key and forcing your device to connect to him, and then there would be more attacks. So I ended up demoing this live at CBS with CBS 5 Bay Area News, where we actually did this attack at a coffee shop just to show how potent this was. And, that got me a lot of press, spoke at a bunch of conferences. So I guess that still remains the most fun attack which I discovered.
Yeah, getting a feature on local news is no joke for the security world. So thinking about your kind of education background here, right? We talked about the IIT portion already. The next section of your career, which we'll get to in a second, you focused mostly on providing resources for pen tester training and education, skill development, right? What did you do back in 2006 in order to learn those different pen testing skills that were required to actually go and work?
Yeah. So I actually got a very lucky break, and which was, when I was in my university at the Indian Institute of Technology, during my third year, everybody in IITs tries to apply for a foreign internship. So I applied to over 600 places, and one of them replied, and this was the University of Hochschule für Technik in Zurich, Rapperswil. And they basically said, Vivek, we have this little thing on Wi-Fi security. Have you ever worked in Wi-Fi security? And Kyle, this was a time when there was no access points in India. Actually, there were barely any laptops. So, and I don't even know if you remember the time when they used to have PCM CIA cards, which you had to put in. Probably not. Kind of also dates me a little bit. So, I needed this internship, right? Because, hey, that would have been my first trip abroad. So what I did is I went online, looked at like 100 different research papers and quickly created a mishmash of all of that, sent it to the professor. And he was like, hey, this is impressive. So he called me and I went to Zurich for 3 months. And imagine day one, he hands me a laptop with a PCM CIA card. And I don't even know where it goes because those slots were concealed. So anyway, so that was actually a very lucky break. In those 3 months, I helped them solve a bunch of security problems, including one from Zurich Railways. And so I was very lucky that even before Wi-Fi access points were a thing in India, I had exposure. And that ended up, when I did an interview with Airtight, they were surprised because they were like, how did you even get access to all of this technology? So, connecting the dots looking backward, I never kind of like felt that would have helped, but that is what, kind of allowed me to get into Airtight and things changed from there on.
So then how does this all segue into the creation of Binary Security Group? So again, we talked about the timeline a little bit here. Graduate in 2004, end up doing some of this, let's say more traditional, like developer, architect, consultant work for 7 years or so. And you start Binary Security Group in 2011, which is, again, some security training resources. You just mentioned how you kind of had that experience firsthand of saying, I got pretty lucky. Like I had an opportunity that ended up working out, maybe unlucky for 599 opportunities there, but lucky for at least one. And there's a lot to be said within that. But how does that all tie together? How were you inspired? Why did you decide to then go and provide all these resources?
Yeah, so what ended up happening is, once I discovered a bunch of these attacks, a lot of people in the company that I used to work for, Airtight, came to me and said, Vivek, how did you even discover all of this? How did you write all of this low-level code? So I started conducting just my own free classes within the company during weekends when, all of the rest of the guys, most of us were bachelors. We used to just show up, over the weekend so that we could, work a little bit, go out together, grab lunch. So a little bit of like the whole Silicon Valley kind of like vibe, but, all the way back in India. And that was the time when a lot of people started telling me, you know what, you have a knack for teaching. This is a difficult topic. And I finally understood it, based on how you taught it. So when I came back after speaking at DEF CON, Black Hat and all, I said, you know what, like I want to probably just do full-time research. So I went back to my parents' place, literally in a very small mezzanine floor room with an attached bathroom. And I started researching. And then I said, you know what, I'm looking at so many things. Why not just go ahead and create some videos so that I could remember how I do all of this? And then when I made those videos, I just said, why not just put it online and see what happens? So I created a free website called securitytube.net back in the day. YouTube was entertainment. SecurityTube was for security people. And this was roughly 2008, 2009, actually. It was pre-forming a company. The readership grew where we started getting over 100,000 unique cybersecurity enthusiasts a month. And people started writing to me from all over the world saying, hey, I would like to learn offensive security. We are this training institute in Amsterdam, Brussels, the United States. Do you want to come down and teach us? We'd actually pay you. So in 2010, 2011 is when I finally said, if I could just go out and do a bunch of these trainings, I can save up enough to live off it for the rest of the year and just do my research. And honestly, I was an accidental entrepreneur. There's nobody in my family who's ever built a company. My parents are all bankers. And I just thought, good, like nobody's going to complain. At least I'm making my own money. Now, when I started going, what's happened is I used to take a class, 10 students, and each one of them would say, you know what, I want you to do this in my company. So the word spread. I must have done somewhere around 25 different countries in 2 years. I just went from one airport to the other, never came back to India, no joke. Saved up a lot of money and then started our very first office and started hiring people. And very soon that ended up becoming, into a cybersecurity monitoring product, which I created, Pentester Academy, and a bunch of other smaller things, all completely bootstrapped, which then I started to kind of like, grow, into a large company.
Wow. Okay. So thinking through this, you start with these kind of free video resources that you're just providing to the public, and you just kind of made them for yourself to begin with. Then you start getting these inbound requests for paid trainings, which first of all, that's awesome that people are able to find you like that and they have that much demand for what you're providing. I think that speaks volumes about your teaching ability. Then you start doing these trainings, more and more keep coming just based on some of the network effects. You realize it's actually bringing in enough revenue to kind of sustain you. And then you decide, okay, let me expand into some new areas here, right? So this is when you said you started hiring some people. You mentioned building a monitoring product out of this. So far, we're very focused on the education piece and some of the network effects that are coming from there. That's clearly what a lot of these customers wanted at this time. But tell me about that transition towards the monitoring product and how that ended up playing out.
Yeah. So the beauty of actually being a trainer and, speaking to red teams, blue teams in large organizations, defense agencies, who I trained, was people used to be very candid about their security problems, right? Because they're here to learn, here to understand, what you could do to help them. So that is really where a very large defense agency, where I was conducting 90-day boot camps back to back, they basically said, look, Vivek, this is amazing. Our recruits have understood all of this Wi-Fi, 802.11ac security and breaking that you've shown. But to be honest, you know what? These guys are all going to forget that in the next 20 days. This is too much, right? And they came and said, do you think you could automate all the attack scripts and everything that you showed us, all the monitoring stuff that you showed us, and just build out a small product which you could just sell us so that our operators can just go press a couple of buttons and start monitoring 11AC? So then I thought to myself, I was like, why not? Like I already had the scripts. I was anyway giving them all of those hardware platforms to do it. And then, it's crazy, right? I was speaking to the defense agency and they basically said, like, how much do you want to charge for it? And I did the math. And again, not a businessman at all, right? Like the worst introduction to business ever. I looked at it and said, the hardware device is $300. I'll probably add in $300 more for the script. And you know what? I'll charge you $600 per device. And people, and sometimes when you come off as very genuine, people are very nice. So this head looked at me and laughed. And he said, do you know who you're selling to? He was like, just throw in 1 year of support and sell these devices for $6,000 a device, not 600. And then he, came in and said, well, we buy 100 to begin with. So, and these, many of these incidents, Kyle, taught me something. You know what, like, most of the time, if you do the right thing, if you do your work well, people want you to succeed. And I think that's a lesson I've learned all my life is, be genuine, be nice, be helpful. Karma works its way around, things.
Very nice story from a kind of personal standpoint and heartwarming in a lot of ways. In another lens, maybe not great as a taxpayer, but but alas, it is what it is. Okay, so then Pentester Academy kind of takes off over the course of that next 6-7 years, and you end up getting acquired in, I think it was 2016, something like that, and stayed on for
2021. So what I did was
2021. Okay.
Right from 2011, I started the company. Then we started hiring people. We had an office in India. Then I moved over to America because we started the US office. We had around 35 people in India, around 15 in the Bay Area. Eventually, we started a Singapore office with around like 7 to 10 more people as well. And by then, I think the operations were starting to be big. We literally had most of the Fortune 500 companies as our customers. All the top US banks were using Pentester Academy because what we had also done is we had created a lab environment where you could pretty much simulate any form of attack defense lab. And we allowed you to mix cloud native components along with on-prem components and whatnot. And it was probably the most sophisticated lab platform, till the time we kind of like sold the company. So I was starting to get a lot of acquisition offers. But honestly, I did not want to sell it, right? Like we were making great money. I was enjoying the ride. And I think that's the reason why I kept running it for a while. And then around, 2020 was when I finally said, you know what, I have a lot of other interesting ideas that I want to work on. And now Pentester was operationally starting to become very intensive. I mean, it's a bootstrapped company, right? So, all the way to exit, we maintained almost an 85% profit margin, even with, a reasonably medium-sized team. Yeah. And that was when I decided in 2021, INE backed by Providence Equity, which is one of the largest private equity funds, in the US. They contacted me, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I said, okay, let's do this. And then I took a little bit of a break and then started SquareX.
Yeah. And during that break period, you also started this kind of passion project. I think it was like a comic book based on the cybersecurity world. Tell me about that a little bit. When I first looked at your timeline, I thought, okay, he started this passion project as a way to kind of like keep himself busy and kind of stay engaged with the ecosystem after the exit, but then realized that maybe wasn't enough for him, and then started SquareX a year after. How true is that?
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a very exciting thing that I did, but I'll tell you how it happened, right?
Yeah.
My elder son came. So when I sold to INE, I was there with them for around, 6 months to a year. And then I took a break. And at that time, one of the days, my son came to me and he said, Dad, what do you do? I mean, you're sitting at home all day, right? And I said, you know what? You're old enough, just go Google your dad's name and tell me what I do. So when he went online and he searched, my name was put as one of the top hackers, the top 10 hackers out of India, top 10 hackers who spoke at here, spoke there. And then he came back to me and said, you're a hacker, you steal from people. And and that's when, Kyle, I realized that the mainstream narrative, I mean, when we started, hacking was all about curiosity, learning new things. But the mainstream narrative around hackers and hacking had started to become so negative that is, exactly what my son could, piece together. So then I said, holy shit, like, this is bad, right? You don't want your son to grow up thinking your dad is some kind of a mafia boss, running an online scam. Maybe he thought I was running the Nigerian scams. And then I said, maybe I could try to create something which younger people would relate with. And almost all of us have gone through that age group where we read comic books and, look at superheroes and whatnot. So I said, why not create a hyper-realistic hacker vigilante comic book where I show the attacks as they are and try to make, the vigilante kind of be someone who's curious, who really wants to understand things and all of that. So then I sat down, scribbled together, I can't draw to save my life, but I did the storyboarding. And then I hired a full team in Singapore, almost like 7 to 8 people full time. And we've actually created 7 comic books, by the way. I put out 1. I'm going to put out the remaining. I mean, it's pending with me. And of course, to your point, when I was doing that, Sequoia Capital, Southeast Asia had been a small investor in Pentester in the final days. And I'd already built a very good relationship with them. Roy, the partner, we used to discuss so much. So then he started saying, he was like, dude, like, so much of cybersecurity, you're still, kind of like middle-aged. So he was like, hey, you should probably get back in the game and, just do something. And I said, look, I have some ideas. And he said, just go do it. So then I, invested a bunch of money from my side, got the early team, created the prototype, and then Sequoia SEA, now Peak 15, basically said, look, we would love to read the seed round. And from there, I started like SquareX.
Okay, so SquareX, essentially a Chrome extension that allows for an increased level of kind of control and protection over a user's browsing session. You're offering it at the consumer level and enterprise level today. We'll talk more about this. What I want to start with is you just mentioned how you just had a ton of different ideas kind of rattling around in your brain, this potential in terms of where you could go with your next business. What made you choose this opportunity in particular?
Yeah. So I think, as part of Pentester, I was interacting with a lot of red teams, and primarily red teams within organizations try to emulate how hackers could break in. And many of these red teams from the largest banks, financial institutions, they used to come to me and say, Vivek, we use this SASE product, secure web gateways. We have endpoint security. Could you probably show us how attackers could still get initial access onto our endpoints? And that was the time I started realizing that, almost everybody spends over 90% of their time on web browsers now, right? Like all applications are SaaS, 10% in applications like Outlook. And that is really where almost all attacks start from within the browser, right? The browser is the gateway to the internet. And at that point, what I found was that there were very rudimentary browser extensions from antivirus companies, which would block based upon blacklists and some very lightweight work. At that point in time, I felt enterprise browsers, Island, Talon, these guys were looking at access control and a bunch of other stuff. But nobody was looking at fundamentally solving, attack problems in the browser. Now, having been an attacker for most of my life, I kind of realized that, look, attacking is actually easier than defending because the attacker only has to win once. The defender has to win every single time, right? Game theory, sadly, the defender will eventually lose against a persistent attacker. So so that was the first aha moment. The second thing which I kind of figured is, look, the internet as we consume it isn't probably going to change very drastically in the next 10, 15, 20 years, which probably means web browsers are still going to remain the primary way we log into the internet. So I felt like, browsers aren't going to change into something so drastically fast that if I started building within the browser, we would kind of get phased out like in the next 2 years or 3 years. I knew that in the consumer market, if, a browser has to change, we will have enough time to adapt because for everybody to change a browser into some other application, that's a really long time. The third tailwind, Kyle, was that browsers were becoming increasingly more capable because companies like Google and Microsoft were investing quite a bit. Now you have WebRTC, real-time communication. I mean, we are doing an entire recording right here in the browser, right? We don't need a native application anymore. So the browser was becoming as capable as an operating system, but people hadn't really looked at how to push the limit to build a security product, to build a security agent into it. And our key thing was like, could we actually even run machine learning algorithms in the browser? Could we go ahead and do, in-depth kind of like DOM monitoring and a lot of other crazy stuff, which we felt, could build an entire new class of product. So I think all of that led to me deciding this is a large enough problem simply because, everyone uses a browser, whether you are an end user or an enterprise user. So the impact that we could have if we did something, really well was internet scale. And I think, I wasn't really enchanted at that point with being a founder or anything. I was really kind of motivated by seeing this as a problem that I could make a very big mark when it came to my own legacy as someone who's dedicated his life to cybersecurity. So that is really what got me motivated.
Take one layer deeper when you think about the technical capabilities, product, feature. Were the specific attack indicators that you were planning on having SquareX focus on detecting?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I'll run you through an interesting use case, right? So imagine today that there's a large organization and a bad actor is deciding to go ahead and hack into that organization. Now, almost always they will end up targeting individual employees simply because, employees still remain the weakest link. So imagine now the entire sales team starts to receive a LinkedIn direct message where someone says, look, we love your company product. We would love to buy it. Could you please fill this vendor form on our website so that we could go contact you? Now, how many salespeople wouldn't just click and immediately start filling it up, right? So now what would end up happening is, let's say, the attacker takes them through a bunch of websites and finally ends up downloading a malicious document which contains ransomware, as an example. Now, if you have endpoint security, all endpoint security can tell you, people like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and all of that, is, oh, you know what? Tom, Dick, and Harry in the sales organization ended up downloading ransomware via the Chrome browser. That is it. There is no attack attribution. There is no visibility into what is going on in the browser, right? On the other end, let's say if you had SASE, SSE, secure web gateways, all they could end up telling you is, this is the last URL from where a malware was downloaded. Because they don't have context of the the application, user interactivity. There is no way they can know that all of these requests are coming even from the same browser tab or different tabs. Because they are looking at network traffic to try and infer application layer attacks. We can already see why that can't work, right, beyond a point. So, and if you looked at enterprise browsers, they primarily had a very simple use case, which is, look, your company Salesforce, your company HubSpot, rather than allow employees to just go about using any device, use our enterprise browser, and that is the only way that they can access. And they can do this by enabling context-aware security and everything on the SaaS portals. So in this case, once the ransomware comes in, the IT team is running, they go to Tom, Dick, and Harry and say, what happened? And either employees don't remember or don't want to remember. And I can disclose a very crazy attack that we've used a lot of time in red teaming assignments. This works every single time. And you know what it is? Contact people within the company and say you're a recruiter for one of the top competitors and, they're willing to offer a 40% pay increase. And here is the job requirement, in a Google document. Every person ends up downloading it. So what is SquareX really? So that is really what is SquareX trying to do? Imagine that within SquareX, if once you install it, when such an attack happens, SquareX can immediately tell you that David, with a fake profile on LinkedIn, ended up sending a message to Tom, Dick, and Harry And they ended up clicking and going through all of these websites, finally where something got downloaded. So this entire attack graph is something SquareX can infer because we are tightly integrated with most of the well-known websites. So we understand the structure of LinkedIn, we understand the structure of Gmail, and that is why we can pick up all of those indicators. Now, once we do that, our algorithms can automatically do IOC detection and correlation. So even though we saw it first for Tom, we immediately correlate and say, you know what, Dick and Harry also had a similar attack with different files sent to them. And then auto remediation can automatically kind of like kick in. So attack attribution, attack flow graphs, all of that is really what SquareX is focusing on, which is detecting, blocking, threat hunting web attacks within the enterprise.
Yeah, and it kind of ties back to, I think, the angle that we touched on previously, which is a little bit of a kind of monitoring and response portion as well, right? Whereas I think a lot of, let's say, like application security or even secure browser tools today are more focused on protection. This is focused on having that kind of auditability so you can learn from it after the fact rather than just blocking it, which is, I think, an interesting angle there. But tell me, what are the limitations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, what are browser extensions allowed and what are they disallowed, right? So browser extensions do have superpowers. And those superpowers allow us to go ahead, monitor every single tab, every single page, inject our monitoring JavaScript into those pages so that now we can monitor, DOM changes, user interactivity and whatnot. And at the browser level, Chrome allows us to tap into things like downloads, events which are happening. Let's say you installed a new extension. We can even block extensions and whatnot. So everything which happens at the application layer within the browser, a browser extension can look, inspect, monitor, stop, do all of that stuff. Now, where some limitation kicks in is Chrome doesn't allow us to go ahead and arbitrarily block network requests. So there is a way to do some of it, but that is one small limitation. And that is really where, Kyle, to your point, SquareX has a massive roadmap where we start off as an extension. We are also now starting to look at deploying a lightweight agent which can talk to the browser extension. And this is done using something called native communication, which all browsers support. And that way, we actually go ahead and have similar superpowers to a dedicated browser. Now, here's the tricky part. Even if you just took Chromium source code and made some modifications to just block network requests, you would still have to work at the application layer in order to be able to monitor the attacks which are happening. So, interestingly, even if you have an enterprise browser, you will probably have to have something similar to an extension, or you will have to hook every single point where the rendering engine is working, the JavaScript runtime is working, in order to be able to figure out what's really happening at the application layer. Simple example, an attacker is trying to do a SSO hijacking attack, right? Or a credential stealing attack. Now, if you are just sitting at the browser exe level, how do you even infer what is really happening in one of your threads? And that is actually a credential stealing attack, right? I mean, the only way is if you're starting to monitor at the level where the rendering engine, the interaction engine and all of that is working. And pretty much the best way to implement it is actually an extension. So that is probably the reason why many of the enterprise browsers are more focused on access control at the network layer, at the website layer, and just have probably safe browsing as a checkbox, probably mostly relying on Chrome's own safe browsing.
Okay, an important difference to think about between the kind of enterprise browsers and what SquareX is offering is the actual model of who you're offering it to, right? So these enterprise browsers are specifically focused on, you could probably guess, enterprise, whereas you've taken the approach of offering both a consumer and enterprise edition. Now, my initial kind of hypothesis, based on looking at this a little bit further and based on everything you've said so far, is leveraging the kind of network effects that come with just giving out the consumer version for free, getting people to then recommend that within their companies who will then end up purchasing the enterprise version. But is that the case? I mean, tell me why you opted for this model.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think I'll break it up into multiple parts. In the past 20 years that I've been in this industry, I've always seen that whenever you come out with a disruptive product, it takes a while for people to start to adopt it, right? And generally, the adoption for any disruptive products is always bottoms up, because the guys who are working, implementing security, they quickly understand, why from a nuanced perspective, this is better than what they're using. It'll never probably come, from the CISO, unless the CISO is a very technical CISO, right? And that is really where what I kind of figured is, if we are going the browser extension route where we are building, AI, ML models inside WebAssembly, all of that running locally, then we really want these security administrators, these implementers to be on our side. And the only way to do that is if you can start warming them up towards the product and what we are building. So very early on, I kind of realized that, look, you have to put things to the test, put it out. So today, SquareX's free extension is used by over 200,000 cybersecurity and IT people. And we have massive number of inbounds coming in from, companies in Finland, in Europe, in America, where people are like, hey, when are you going to do this on the Edge browser? When is the enterprise product coming? Because we want to deploy this. And the free one we originally gave with isolation and a couple of other features, not much of the heavy duty ones that we have in enterprise. And people just came to us and said, well, you know what, we could even want to deploy this. So that was a very early sign to us that there is probably going to be a very good bottoms up. So what we did is literally 7 to 8 months into the company, we put this out and we actually offered a 25,000 bug bounty program. We said, look, if you can break out of our isolation, we will pay you. No startup does that in 6 to 8 months of starting, right? Because in your mind, you're probably vulnerable, right? Because you're building too fast. So we said, let's put things to the test. Parallelly, what we did is we started building out the enterprise product, and we had planned to go ahead and put it out at RSA. A month before RSA, we started talking to a lot of very big brands, went in, looked at their use cases, showed them how to use our product. And that is really where I think, we are starting to pilot with some of the biggest consumer brands right now. Hopefully in the next 4 months, we can reveal their names on our website. But that strategy clearly worked. So the best part was I went to one of these very large consumer companies. Their entire security team was there. 3 of them basically said, you know what, I've actually used your free version of your extension and I really like it. So I feel like, the purchasing process now has started to become more intelligent. You really cannot, feed people marketing speak and expect them to buy anymore. At the very same time, we were very aggressive at speaking at a lot of conferences, talking about the limitations of security products out there. And I think that makes people more curious to come talk to us and say, you said secure web gateways are broken. Could you show me a demo? I'm using one of the top 3 vendors in the Gartner quadrant. And you know what we do, Kyle? We have a special page. We just send them a link and say, click on this and see if a well-known ransomware like WannaCry just downloads through their SWG. And when it happens, they immediately give you a call. And we are going to be releasing these new class of attacks that we've discovered later this year at a bunch of hacker conferences.
Thinking about the future of SquareX and where you're headed from here, basically expanding your kind of visibility and ultimately ability to impact the entire attack lifecycle and the monitoring lens there as well. What else is kind of top of mind for you? You mentioned the 200K users that you have already today. Since the email that we'd exchanged maybe a month ago, that's gone up 25,000. So clearly there's massive growth happening here on just a month-over-month basis. What does the future hold?
So I think, what we are trying to do is kind of completely relook on how browser-based security is happening and how you can go about detecting things. So I can tell you that if you talk to most enterprises, they're worried about privacy when it comes to confidential documents and things like that. And nobody enjoys the fact that their document is getting shipped to a security company where it is getting scanned and then downloaded. So, Kyle, what we are trying to also do is build privacy-first security. And what do I mean by that? We can actually do full-blown malicious document detection and all of that entirely into the browser. And the way we do it is our detection algorithm are built in Rust, compiled into WebAssembly, running entirely within the browser with just a threat feed for certain known hashes and all of that being compared additionally. We put out a very big expose with Forbes, where we actually showed that, Google Workspaces, Gmail, Outlook.com, all of them do a very bad job today at scanning for malicious documents. I mean, you can Google it. It was this last month. So this privacy-first security is something which is resonating with a lot of companies that we are kind of looking at. So imagine things like being able to do DLP, but entirely in the browser, where, rather than regular expressions, you could now have, a lightweight LLM getting trained on how your documents look like and then being able to classify. So what holds next for the company is we want to be able to detect identity attacks, hijacking attacks, extension-based attacks, every single thing which can originate on the web directly within the browser, with almost 80% of that detection running entirely client-side, and only 15 to 20% really requiring the cloud. Now, why is this important? I'll give you a statistics, and this will completely blow your mind. Gartner quadrant, the top 5 vendors, I won't name one of the vendors. If you use their SWG, do you know the maximum file size that you can scan in the cloud when you're downloading something? What do you expect it to be? Probably 700, 800 MB, probably a gig, right? I mean, those are good file sizes. 15 MB. If the file size is more than 15 MB, you either have to create a all allow or all disallow policy. One of the largest public market cybersecurity companies, you probably know who I'm talking about, cannot do more than, a couple of 100 MB. Beyond that, literally you could pad malware and it'll just go through. So what we've realized is the fundamental limitation is also the fact that if you do everything as a cloud proxy, you're getting millions of requests, 100,000s of file downloads happening every second. And look, there is only so much computing power that you can give to each of those operations, or else it is not going to be a profitable company anymore, right? Imagine spending 10 seconds per file, doesn't work. So what we've realized is if you really want to do a lot of that deep inspection, today the browser allows you the platform to run all of those in the browser itself. And that is really where we are kind of trying to change the paradigm and say, look, if you are trying to solve web threats, be in the place where you have the richest metrics, where you have all of user interactivity, where today as a platform, it is capable of running AI ML algorithms. And that is really where we hope we kind of become one of the pioneers of flipping the whole cloud versus endpoint and actually do a lot of endpoint edge computing when it comes to security. And that's the real vision of the company.
Fascinating. It's a perfect place to go ahead and share a lot of interesting insights. This last piece in particular, I think, sums up a kind of broader trend of this whole discussion, which is trying to think through this kind of browser world based on your past red teaming and attacker lens, and just challenging assumptions that have been made there traditionally. So it sounds like there's a lot of really exciting potential and opportunity with the future progress of this as the extension continues to develop.
Absolutely. And, we are super excited. The team is excited. And yeah, I mean, we'll keep in touch and we'll keep telling you about like how the progress is going and what's going on.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can write to me at kyle@secureventures.io. I'm Kyle McNulty, and you've been listening to Secure Ventures.